to the students. Okay. Thank you to the students who are attending this evening. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to talk to you and sort of give you some reflections on what I have done over the years as a mediator, and talk about a few ways that you can address important ethical issues, or perhaps I should say a few instances in which you can use as examples as to how you might address important ethical issues when you're mediating or when you're planning to mediate. And I'm going to be asking some questions, so I'd like for you to respond, because this isn't just, I didn't plan for this just to be a regurgitation of what's happened and rules and regulations, but more a thought process. So how will you address these things? It's not the same for everyone, and it's not the same for every situation that you're going to encounter. So to begin, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. I know the bio was sent, and some of this will be repeat, but I'm a mediator. My current practice is in divorce mediation and uncoupling and co-parenting, adoption, that is actually post-adoption visitation. Um, I'm a consultant regarding communication, mediation. I'm an arbitrator for FINRA. Uh, I'm a director for the Southern California Mediation Association and MC3 Mediator Certification Organization. I'm a member of SCMA, MC3, Academy of Professional Family Mediators, the Los Angeles chapter of the Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. I have worked in restorative justice in the city attorney's neighborhood justice program. I worked in their community policing program and the dispute resolution program for the city attorney. I've been an arbitrator mediator for ACMAS, which is the Attorney-Client Mediation Arbitration Services for the county, Los Angeles County Bar Association. I've completed paralegal training and served as a legal document assistant for my clients for about 4 years. Also, I've worked in Los Angeles and Ventura County Superior Courts. Other things also, but I won't bore you with more. I started off in mediation, working at the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office in the dispute resolution program, of which later on Renata was the director. When I started, it was Avis Ridley Thomas as the director, and that's where I got my mediation training. I was working in real estate at the time, and the partner I was working with at that time was a long-time arbitrator and mediator, and he encouraged me to look into mediation. He thought I would be good at it. And as it turns out, I did like it. I've been doing it ever since I took that training in 1991, I believe it was. And we actually planned to start a business, which did not happen because he became ill. He had a stroke. And because I was a new mediator, I did not have the confidence to proceed in mediation at that point as a profession. So I continued in real estate, and then I moved on to investment services. I was an investment counselor for 16 years for a T. Rowe Price company. And when I left there, I decided, well, now is the time to do mediation as a business. And in the meantime, I had actually gone back to school to CSUDH, where you are now, and earned my master's in negotiation and conflict management. And so here I am. Any questions or comments so far that you have? Any questions you'd like to ask me about my background, anything like that?
Well, what haven't you done, Marvin?
I was just thinking the same thing.
Well, I haven't been an attorney, so.
Oh, you can pass on that one.
Okay. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is talk to you about few scenarios and see what you think about how to handle them. And it's important that you develop your own thought process as to how you approach ethics. Because as I said before, there's not really any one way to handle it. And there are various different opinions in the mediation community about how you should handle it. If you're not sure how to proceed in a particular situation in a mediation, you're probably facing an ethical dilemma. And the discussion will address just a few of those issues that will arise when you're working as a mediator. I'm reading one of the chats. Thank you. Someone giving their experience as a commercial real estate agent. So first of all, let me lay this out for you. This is an excerpt from the Standards of Conduct, Mediation Model Standards of Conduct, which is what I use as a base for ethics. And this was the Model Standards of Conduct for Mediators as adopted by the American Arbitration Association, approved by the American Bar Association, and adopted by the Association for Conflict Resolution. Impartiality. A mediator shall conduct a mediation in an impartial manner and avoid conduct that gives the appearance of partiality. A mediator should not act with partiality or prejudice based on any participant's personal characteristics, background, values, and beliefs, or performance at a mediation or any other reason. If at any time a mediator is unable to conduct a mediation in an impartial manner, the mediator shall withdraw. So taking that into consideration, I'm going to lay out a situation for you. And I want you to tell me what you would do, what you would think should be done in this particular situation from your point of view. So before and during a mediation, a participant asks for help in making decisions or advice regarding substantive issues. And always, I'm sure you've had the experience, if you've done mediations, when you sit down with them, participants will frequently ask you, so you're going to help us, you're going to tell us what to do, right? Well, of course, your response is, no, you're going to do that. So, of course, during this conversation that you've been having with this participant, you have stressed that your role is not to make decisions for any of the parties. However, you're in a situation where you really want to bring these participants to settlement. You're thinking, after all, a settlement is in their best interest, and you want to maintain your 96% resolution rate. So what do you do? What do you think? How should you approach that?
Like just open-ended question?
Open-ended. How should you approach it? That's your bias. And we all have bias. But your bias is you really want this mediation to work. And this person has been asking you for advice. How do you approach that situation?
Wouldn't you take a caucus and take them outside and just remind them the ground rules of, this is what I talked about in my opening statement. I'm here to offer support, but to help that person create the boundary. Is that an option?
Yes, it definitely is.
Is an option to caucus and recommend that the party seek professional guidance outside of the immediate mediation? You know, if you want to take a moment and call your lawyer, if you want to take a moment and call this person or whoever they deem they would respect, is that an option?
Certainly that is. That's another option.
Yeah, those are the first two I thought of. I mean, other than just investigative questioning to try to determine what the values are that they're holding and what their basically doing some investigative questioning to further determine, to help them reveal the right choice for them. I would say the first two things that were already mentioned and some questioning around that, I wouldn't know to do anything other than those.
That's fine. Those are perfectly good choices. So far, you've avoided the pitfall of actually giving the person advice, which is, it's hard not to do sometimes, because you see a situation, they've told you the facts of the situation, you're thinking, oh, clearly they should do this or they should do that. This is how it would be best for them. But you shouldn't tell them that. I mean, it's their process, and they have to come to that solution, to their own solution. However, this also sort of touches on another thing, which is, how are you going to practice mediation? Because there's facilitative mediation, there's evaluative mediation, there's narrative mediation, various types of mediation, transformative. So if you're a facilitative mediator, everything that you just said is what you would do. What do you think an evaluative mediator would do? So this is someone who evaluates a situation and sort of leads the participants down a path.
They would be more likely to make recommendations. Or if I was instructed that I was in an evaluative mediation, I would be more likely to guide participants towards viable solutions.
Yes. Now, it's up to you whether or not you provide that service or not. I don't like to do that. I don't like to provide an evaluative opinion, simply because I think the parties should actually make the decision. And when I put myself in that role, then I'm being more of an arbitrator than a mediator. And there's a fine line between the two often. If you're comfortable doing that, then a lot of mediators do that, and especially mediators in commercial situations where they have insurance suits, lawsuits, things like that. They do evaluative mediation, and it works well for them. And honestly, if you had to stick to a facilitative situation in some of those cases, some of the clients would not choose you, because they're used to people, especially in Southern California, they're used to people actually directing them, giving them direction, and giving them what-if opinions for their situation.
And also, when I was working in the commercial field, they didn't understand a lot of the intricacies, particularly of the insurance policies, the payouts, they just did not have enough industry knowledge to feel comfortable making a decision on their own. So in some of those cases, we were tasked with more evaluative input than definitely, in a facilitated environment, that would not happen.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
I have a quick question. Have you done evaluative yourself?
Perhaps a couple of times.
And how
and I was uncomfortable with it.
I was gonna say, how do you keep your own personal bias out of an evaluative mediation? Facilitative, I know that's kind of my comfort zone. That's where I'm leaning towards. I want to go, but they always say it. You have to have experience, and you have to have the time, and you have to do the work to be comfortable with it. But when you're first learning, do you make mistakes and bring your bias into it?
Of course you do. You're learning. And yes, I don't know that one can keep one's bias out of it in an evaluative situation. And that's why I'm uncomfortable with it. We have implicit bias that we're unaware of. And that's how we make decisions. So how do you separate that? How do you make that go away, so to speak? speak, when you're directing someone in a particular fashion in a mediation. I don't think you can. And some people say, because of that very thing, some people say there's no such thing as neutrality or unbiased mediators. I think there is a thing as neutrality, in the sense that if you look at neutrality as, I'm not going to work actively toward or for a participant or toward a specific outcome, then I think neutrality is possible. I think if you define it that way, then yes, it is. Other than that, I don't think it is, because we all have our own biases, and we don't even realize that we're applying them.
What I do when I'm in court is, especially in small claims or even civil harassment, I would go back to the orders that the judges have made previously, and I'd read them, and then I would offer what I found in those readings, and I'd say, well, there's a possibility based on what I've read with this judge that she may lean towards this way. I give them, the both scenarios, and then they get to decide which one is more, which one feels more right for them. And I think that helps sometimes.
Yeah, I can see how it would.
I think family mediation could probably be challenging not to guide someone through too, because if you haven't been through the situation, you don't know what all you're going to have to work out. There might be something that's in your blind spot that you didn't think about. That's
true. And that's why I do family mediation, and that's why I advise everyone to consult with an attorney, either before, during, or after the mediation, so that they understand what they can do. They understand the implications of what they decide to do. It's very important. Now, all of this being said, it is perhaps a mediator's responsibility in some types of mediation, in some cases, and it's up to the person and to the individual mediator to provide information, not a decision, but information to the participants. So, for instance, you're in a situation where, in a commercial situation or family or whatever, and you can provide information to them. So the law, so you can direct them to the actual law and say, okay, so this is what the law says. So this is how you can make your decision. Not applying the law, but giving them the information. And there's a really big, very important distinction, because if you start applying it, now you're acting as an attorney, and not only are you doing them a disservice, but you can get yourself in trouble as
a mediator.
Licensed law.
Martin, would you be kind enough to Martin, would you be kind enough to give us a side-by-side comparison of the difference between stating the law and applying the law?
Sure. So let's say you have a particular situation in mind?
No, but just pick one from your past experience. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say in family law. So let's say someone asked you, so spousal support. So how much should I pay in spousal support? So what you can say is, okay, this is the way the law approaches it. There are different factors that a judge has to take into account when he is determining spousal support. Or you could say, this is the spousal support, let's figure it out. This is the spousal support that you should give according to what we've calculated here.
I see. So direct recommendation versus acknowledging that there is a law that governs it, and perhaps they should look into that. Okay.
Yes, and you can actually do the calculation for them, but let them know that it's a guideline.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what they should be paying or what they should be receiving.
And
Okay.
are you suggesting that that's done in caucus?
No, that's actually done in joint session too. I guess it depends on how comfortable you are with caucus as opposed to joint session. I personally prefer joint session because that's the way I was trained. But I also see the value of caucus, and I use it quite a bit. But I think, as is the favored way of doing things in Southern California, in caucus style for many mediations, that's the norm rather than the exception.
Thank you.
I have a kind of a philosophical thought about facilitative, but well, obviously in mediation, but just generally facilitation at all. And that is that we only know what we know. And so there's an awful lot of things that one chooses to do that they only are going to have the ramifications for. And so in some ways, I've come to feel that even although you may know a lot as a mediator or a negotiator, you may know a lot about the arena that you're working in, but you don't know what you don't know. And so the decisions being as oftentimes as final as they can be, I feel like making those decisions is kind of acting like you're playing God. And so leading them to a place where they have understanding, and then never losing sight of what the whole facilitative process is about, so that you really truly believe as a mediator that they are going to find their own resolve by this process, and that even if the choices turn out to be not as good as they could be in the overall scheme of things, it will have been their call based upon the work done appropriately.
Yes, and I agree with everything that you've said. That is my aspiration, to actually handle it that way, because I do believe, as you've just stated, that the participants are the best deciders. They know what fits for them. In some situations, they come to a conclusion that you think is totally ridiculous, but I think you have to respect that decision. Then there comes an ethical issue, your own personal ethical issue of, okay, so can I let someone do this to themselves? If you feel that you can't, in good conscience, do that, then you probably should withdraw. Some people can't let people make certain decisions. It's just they just cannot do it. But I find that, to me, I shouldn't decide for them no matter what. If I'm uncomfortable with it, I can say, I just cannot do this, and explain why. Don't just leave them in the lurch, but explain why. And sometimes there may be a situation where you refer them out. Maybe it's you refer someone to an attorney. So say, I think you can give your opinion and say, I think you would be better served doing this. I can't make that decision for you, but this is what I think, and make sure that you are clear. And this is just your opinion. And as a mediator, as having been involved in however many cases you've been involved in, then that's your call. As a mediator, it's your call. But I think you should think long and hard before you actually make that kind of a decision and that kind of a suggestion to someone.
I've got a question. You just said Okay, so you go through the mediation, and at the end, they're willing to decide on something that you feel ethically is not in their best interest, and you say you should withdraw. Are we allowed to? I mean, how does that work? Are we allowed to withdraw at the last minute after we've taken their money and scheduled this time and done all of that? I mean,
Well,
that seems a very gray area.
Yeah, well, you'll probably piss them off, but but yes, you can withdraw. It's a voluntary process because it's self-determination, and it's self-determination as to the process, who the mediator is, and the decision. But the mediator also has that self-determination. The mediator can say, yes, I withdraw. The mediation is over, and you can give reasons for doing that. And it's your conscience that you have to deal with as to whether or not you should do it. Rarely have I come across a case where I think maybe the mediator should have withdrawn and not proceeded with a decision. That, in fact, I can't think of one. I can think of a few where, well, that probably wasn't the best thing to let them do. You know, there was a clear imbalance of power. Maybe the mediator could have helped them a little bit, or maybe could have said, you know, advised them to take another tack, something to help. But I don't think that, I would say 99.9 times you're going to come across a situation that it's perfectly okay to let them decide. Maybe that's a 1 in 1,000 or 10,000 that maybe they'd be better off if you withdraw. I just think that it's their call. I think self-determination, which is one of the foundations of the model standards of conduct, I think, is so very important that you just have to let people decide for themselves. And some people don't want to, though. Some people clearly don't want to, and usually they self-select out of mediation and they go to court or they go to arbitration. So rarely does someone who is determined not to decide go through mediation. They'll usually back out, or you know, after a session or so, or when you tell them how you operate, they won't choose mediation. So
one of the things that we've been learning about in our dispute resolution class with Professor Valerie is it's walking the fine line between guiding the individual towards a solution by asking them questions that allow them to reveal their own answers. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, you are guiding them towards having a clearer picture so they can make a more informed decision, but you're not guiding them in the way that a lot of attorneys are used to guiding people, or, you know, more of an arbiter type guidance. And so I think one of the examples that stands out in my mind was something like, when you see what could be an imbalance in the settlement, that you might take an individual aside, caucus or otherwise, and simply say, okay, but I'm glad that you've come to something that's suitable for you. Have you considered whether this is suitable to the extent that it will last you 30 years? Mm-hmm. You know, have you considered that your injuries may go on for a while? And if so, would this meet that need? So she kind of is showing us how to frame our questions in that regard. So to me, that's still guiding, but it's facilitative guiding.
Yeah, yes, I'd agree. It is guiding. You're sort of calling to your attention possible shortcomings.
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think you're not guiding them to the actual specific solution. You're saying you should consider this.
Right. And Thank you. And
Yeah.
so what, certainly I wasn't implying there's anything wrong with it. What I'm trying to do is lead into, can you tell us some of the phrases that you use so frequently? They're like secondhand notions to you. You might even have to think about it for a minute because you've been doing this so long, but would you mind just, throwing out some of the phrases that you frequently go to when you're trying to extract those, those considerations from your clients?
Well, one very favorite phrase I have is, "Have you consulted with an attorney?" Because because therein lies the value of the consulting with an attorney in many situations,
Right.
and that's why I do it up front, so that I'm not faced with that usually in the mediation, because then they can check with the attorney. And I tell them what you want to do is to make sure that you understand what's possible
Mm-hmm.
and what you're agreeing to, what the implications are of what you're agreeing to. And that's so very important. And that's what you're actually pointing out. So 30 years from now or 20 years from now, you may need medical care that should be covered by this settlement. So are you taking that into account rather than the immediate benefit? So that's one. Another is, and actually one that I use most of the time at the very beginning of a mediation, which is, how would you like for this to turn out for yourself? What is the best case that you would like to see this? How would you like for this to end up in your opinion, the best way that it could end up? Or how would you like the future to look like after this mediation? Questions like that,
Mm-hmm.
like that, especially in a family situation. So how would you like your family, how would you like to relate to your ex-husband or your ex-wife after the divorce?
Mm-hmm.
How would you like your children to look at you 20 years from now when they're adults and they look back on the situation?
Yeah, that's deep.
Those are
Question.
really good start off phrases, I think, too. Probably also bring out some of the, like a prelude to what you're about to sit down and walk into, too, I would imagine sometimes.
Yes.
Wouldn't that help with moving from position to interest? That is basically what you're saying.
Yes, without saying it.
Right.
And that's very important. That's very important because positions. If you're stuck on positions, you're just in a settlement conference. It's like being a judge saying, okay, well, we're going to go to settlement conference and we're going to decide, and the judge actually directs them as to where they should go according to the law. And that's position based. But interest based, what do they really want out of the process? That's what you're getting at. How will this best serve you? That's what you want. That's how you want to, that's the point that you want to get to. So how will this best serve you as a participant in this mediation?
The long
Where do you
view.
really want to go? Yeah. I have another hypothetical. Actually, I have a few more, but here is one, and actually was a real case. It was a post-adoption visitation mediation, and I was co-mediating for this. And a father who was faced with surrendering his parental rights so that his child can be adopted by foster parents who've cared for the child for about 3 years. 2 years ago, the father left the mother and the child and hasn't been in contact since. but the father was notified of the adoption, as is usually the case, and so he has the opportunity to come forward and object to the adoption or approve it. The mother is drug dependent and has agreed to the adoption. He keeps putting up roadblocks as to why he may not want to approve the adoption. Given what I've told you, what do you think? How do you think you could or would approach that kind of a situation? And then I'll tell you what actually happened.
Do you have communication with the father? Is that one of the parties that you've described?
The father is
the other
in the
party?
mediation with.
Okay.
He's in the mediation with the prospective parents. Sorry that I didn't give that detail. Yes.
No, that's helpful.
And yes, and it's in a caucus situation. It's not. They're not together yet. It's in a caucus situation. So.
I mean, probably my first question would be, how do you envision your relationship changing? Should you prevent this adoption from happening? How do you envision your relationship changing since you haven't been in the picture for 3 years? Like, what are your plans for how you're going to father this child if you're going to deny them another parent? What are your thoughts on that? How do you envision that relationship being different than it is today? What do you hope to achieve by interfering with the child receiving another parent? Because this is the parent that you described in your case study as being absent for 3 years?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That would be my first question to that party.
Okay.
I would say, are the roadblocks that you are presenting, do you feel that those roadblocks are to get even with the mother of the child, or to stop the parents from giving the child a healthy environment? It's like, is it a personal vendetta versus, are you hanging on to that anger?
For me, it would, the couple of things that come to mind are the question, why were you absent for 3 years? And do you see yourself capable of raising this child on your own? And do you see your wife as stepping aside here for the child, or do you see her stepping aside because she doesn't want to raise the child? In other words, is she putting the child first? And in a sense, are you putting the child first?
Yeah, that's really the issue, because sometimes when a parent disappears for 3 years, they're struggling with something: mental health, drug addiction, alcoholism. And, in their mind, it's, I'm going to get a handle on it any minute. It could be financial disrepair, but those things can tend to drag on for years. So I think finding out that question that Peter had, like finding out why they weren't out of the picture, is kind of important, because somebody who disappears but then doesn't want to give up ownership of their right to be called a father, there's something going on there.
Yes, perhaps.
I'm going to step in here at this point. I think I'd like to start off by creating some level of rapport with him, to kind of get a sense of lay of the land, because at this point, clearly we already know the issues. The issues are, he's been gone, he's been whatever, he knows that. But, in order to get a sense of what's going on behind the scenes, if we approach with an accusatory, or where have you been, or what have you been doing, you may not reach the core of what was really going on. There may be something else that we are not fully aware of. So by starting off by creating a rapport, how do you see this? And what is your relationship with the child? And what would you like to see going forward? And how do you envision this happening? And, how has this changed over the time that you've had an opportunity to step away? What's different now? where are we now? Where are you going to go with this? You start with for me, I would start with a rapport building concept so that we can, then they'll start to kind of open up, create a safe space for him to have this conversation so we can get a really good sense of what's behind the scenes, and then we can go into, we already know he's been absent, he's been this, those are facts, but what's beneath it, that would be my approach, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I really love that, Marquita, because face value says, I didn't care about this child that was created and I walked away. But there are so many layers to absentee parenting that are not as clear cut.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I really appreciate that, because he needs to be able to say, I tried to stay involved with my child, but the mother kept moving, or I couldn't find them, or I had no idea that this child was even in foster care and up for adoption, or
exactly.
I now am employed and have the agency to be able to create a house for my child, and I was 17 at the time and couldn't, there's a lot of other layers as opposed to just what we imagine an absentee parent, especially a male, an absentee parent is facing.
And I think that's where your biases come in. We have to be very, 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 very careful at that point, because when you talk about biases and ethics and what have you, those tap into our triggers. We talk a lot about self-determination, as Marvin was talking about. For self-determination, we need to, what's our triggers? What's our background? Did we have somebody absentee in our family? And is this where we're going? Where are we going? What's firing off in our situation? So before we go into our firing off spots, we have to take a step back and ask the question, for me, in this scenario, what else could this mean? This could mean, okay, I know where my brain wants to go, but what else could this mean in this scenario? So my approach would be a rapport building concept, a way to kind of, okay, let's create safe space and have a container to have this kind of, so that we can have the conversation that's going to be beneficial for the kid and for everybody involved.
So would that be part of your intake? Or would you wait until you were actually in the negotiations?
This would have actually been discussed in the actual session, because where this was actually occurred was in dependency court with an adoption case. So you can't ask people on intake. You don't do a normal intake. They just show up, and then you basically do the intake there with an attorney. And Melissa has put several questions, actual questions in the chat that I think should be explored too. And actually, most of them were. Did he know where the child was the last few years? Yes, he did. Would he like to have a relationship with the child? Perhaps. Are the grandparents in the picture? Yes. There was no illness. He was not out of the country, and he didn't know the child was alive. So all of these things are actually good questions to have. And actually, we did cover most of them in the mediation. Something else that came up in the mediation that we discovered was that I was reading the chat that Marquita put in. Did it take time for you to realize you need to step back, or have you always had that ability? Oh, that's directed at me.
No, that was to me, right? Right? Oh, to me.
That was for you.
Oh, no, I didn't. No,
it was you. Yes,
that was to me.
That was from Anne Marie. That was to you. Yes,
that was to me.
Yes. Well, answer that question. So, have you always had that ability?
I'm going to say probably in many ways, yes. I think I've always kind of like try to figure out, like I asked, what else could this mean? Because I know that left to our own devices, I know where my brain's going to go. I know what I'm thinking. But sometimes I've kind of learned over time that but what I think is, what I'm assuming is going on, you ask the question, it's like, oh, okay, well, I didn't even think about that. So I've kind of learned over time just to take, in everything though, to take a step back and say, as some people make certain comments, and they say certain things that are kind of really wild, and you think, well, where is that coming from? So I've kind of just taught myself over time to kind of say, what else could this mean? Take a step back and see what else is going on underneath. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
that approach will serve you well in mediation,
mm-hmm.
because a lot of what we do as mediators is to discover what's really going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's presented to you most of the time is not what's really going on. That's
not even
really
close.
Well, it's not the issue. It's
not even close. It's usually something else, right? It's like,
right, it is.
Yeah, yeah. So, but that's why I think it's important, to do those triggers. You need to know what's going on inside of you. Like I said, sometimes like this absentee, situation might be our own personal triggers. It's like, well, I remember so-and-so, we have things that fire. And sometimes we don't even know that's going to happen until we're presented with the situation and we hear ourselves having all these thoughts in our head and we start to go into certain places. And that's when you take that step back and go, okay, this is, where are we going with this? And then afterwards, we really need to kind of really be comfortable with the kind of cases that we take and be clear. Can you always take a domestic violence case? Maybe you can't. Can you take a divorce case? Maybe you can't. And maybe you can. Maybe you're ready. Maybe you can do that. But based on where you've been, that's where you talk about those implicit biases that come in, whether, even though we think we're okay, you just have to kind of, just do that check-in periodically. I do the whole mindfulness thing. The ones in here know me about the mindfulness thing, but do the check-in. You have to do that. So,
right. Yeah. Yes. And I appreciate where you were going with that. Melissa asked another couple of questions. Was he incarcerated? No. Was he having financial difficulties? Well, I don't know. Probably not. But we covered most of these questions. And really what it comes down to is, how hard are you going to try to convince this person that he should give up his parental rights? So do you think that's something that you should do, that you should try to, knowing the situation that this child has been neglected, his mother's a drug addict, his father deserted him, how hard do you work toward this person giving up his parental rights?
Forgive me, Martin. I'm not familiar with the statute in California, but what would that entail? I mean, is this child going to become or remain a foster child? What is the situation?
No, he's up for adoption. So he wouldn't remain a foster child. The choice is that he remain as a foster child or be adopted.
Okay. So how is he up for adoption if the parents never signed away their rights?
They're in the process. The father has been notified of the adoption. He has come to respond.
Okay.
So there are attorneys involved, and this is the mediation that sets up visitation after the adoption. However, and this was something that wasn't clear to us when we first started doing these cases, we as the mediators had to break the news to the parent who was giving up the child that he had to give up, or she had to give up parental rights.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize a child could be offered up for adoption in California without the parents severing their right.
No, they can't. But that's why we're in the mediation. That's one of the reasons we're in the mediation, although it's not the ostensible reason we're in the mediation. So it's sort of a backdoor. I
guess I'm just trying to it. Sure. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Well, did you say that?
I understand perfectly what you're saying.
Okay, I'm just wondering.
Did you say that the same questions that we had?
Child.
Did you say that the father did not know the child existed?
No, the father knew the child existed.
He did. Okay.
That's a different situation, and that occurs also. When the father deserted the child, walked away.
Well, you can see how this could get really complicated, ethically complicated.
Yes. Yes. So the current guardian happens to be the adoptive parents or prospective adoptive parents, but that's really not the question. The question is, in order for there to be an adoption, the father has to agree to it. So one of your tasks is two tasks. One, help the father get to the point where he can sign away his parental rights. Two, what kind of visitation, if any, will he have with the child after he's adopted? Those are the two questions. Does that clarify for you, Melissa?
So if the father has been absent and you're in this mediation, you're asking him to make a tremendous decision in a very tight time constraint. I'm baffled, because it's almost like saying, you know, your boat is sinking. Do you save you or your child? You know, how do you?
Yeah, well, that's dependency court and the adoption situation. So you're frequently faced with situations like that. It's not easy work.
And is it a time constraint, or you know, like Professor Valerie was saying, sometimes mediations, you know, you can have multiple sessions, but in this situation, is it a single session where you need to have resolution so that the courts can process?
Depends. It could be, it's not required, but it could be a single session, and it could go on for more than single session. So it could be 2 or 3 sessions.
And you say,
really,
you talk about parent visitation, his visitation. Well, what if the adoptive parents don't want him to have visitation?
That's why you're in mediation.
So if he says, yeah, you can adopt, but I want to be able to see my child once a month, and then you go back to the adoptive parents and they're like, nope, we want a clean cut. We want to have nothing at all. You're at a stalemate.
That's where your work begins. As I said, it's not easy.
That's why we make the big money.
Yeah, I imagine you need to just draw their interests back out to the interest of the child. What's in the best interest of the child? And you would just start trying to cull that.
But even that's so hard to do now. Summing something up in a couple hours you spend with someone, that history, that, you know, whatever. Back.
Well, these mediations would go on for several hours. They would start in the morning. And if everyone was there on time, it would start about 10 o'clock. I'm going to go all the way until 4:30. And we've actually done them and closed down the court, and we actually had to stop doing it. Would mediate until 5:30 or 6 o'clock.
How much context is usually given to you in those situations? Is it like, I mean, and how much is fair to give to a mediator too, like as far as? Well,
you have the case file, so you know what's been going on. So my question, the question really is, so how hard do you try with this father? This is another one of those situations where, do you feel you really want this to end in a solution, in a settlement? Or do you step back from it?
That would be your opinion.
Yes.
If you felt that the child would be better off not being in the custody of the father, that because he walked away, he theoretically gave up his parental rights, that these people that want to adopt the child are more than capable of caring for the child. That's your opinion. You've listened to all the evidence, and according to your judgment, that's what you came up with. But isn't the spirit of facilitating that kind of a solution really have to do with the parties involved? So would that be guiding someone toward what you think they should do, as opposed to helping them figure out between the two parties or three parties what would be the best thing for all three of them? Back to your original question, right. What do you want out of this? What do you see in a year, 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do you think is the best for? So my answer to that question is, I don't think that we should be in the position to do that.
No, but you're in that position.
Right.
But don't we fight for neutrality?
Yes. Yes, we do. But this is a situation you find yourself in. This is an ethical question. And you can say sitting here now that yes, no, I would not do that. But if you're in the moment, you may.
That's a tough case, because at this point, you know, you're sitting in a space. What if you uncover something that you obviously was not in the files, and you're thinking, oh, well, wait a minute. Now this dad is not who we thought it was, or this was the situation. And so, and, you know, and when you talk about relinquishing parental rights, you know, when you talk about the best interest of the child, from whose perspective? Because when you talk about that from the perspective of a third party, fine, we can look at that objectively and say, well, this looks like this would be the path to go. But when you talk, but if you are that parent, what are you going to think? You're going to believe that the best interest of the child is for that child to be with you. You know, because in your heart and spirit, you're going to think, well, you know, I'm going to be better. I'm going to do this. This is what's going to happen. And so now you're in this position where that's what they're going to believe the best interest of the child is. The best interest of the child is to always be with their parent or father or whatever. So, I mean, that's a tough, it's an easier lawyer question. It's an easier arbitrator question, but as a mediator, that's a tough one. That's a tough space to be in, because yeah.
So it occurs to me that this is when the questions have to be much more pertinent. Asking a general question, you know, do you think you can raise this child, you know, that has your name and so forth, is all good. Asking them, do they imagine themselves raising this child for the next 10 years, 15 years? And do you know, do you think that the child would be as easily accepted into another family if you only spent, let's say, the next 5 years and felt that you couldn't handle it after that point? So you help somebody to think it through a little bit as to how far in they really are and how far in they really think they will be. Remember, I'm not trying to throw disparity on this person, but he already has shown himself to turn away for 3 years from his child. So I think it's, you know, I think at some point difficult questions need to be asked so that you can make tough decisions. I think sometimes things seem kind of flowery. Yeah, I want my child. Okay, how far in are you?
Well, let me tell you what happened. We explored most of the options that you've set forth here. Both the open approach, the more directive approach. As it turns out, what we discovered during the mediation was his family was a large reason that he did not want to give up parental rights. As it turns out, he didn't care that much. It wasn't about the best interest of the child. It was how he was going to look to his family. And he blocked the adoption and the adoption case was going forward. It was a contested adoption. As it turns out, I forget how many months later, it was months and months later, we discovered that he had backed off.
He what?
He backed off.
Oh, okay.
He didn't want the child.
Mm-hmm.
But he would not agree to it because he would be giving up his blood. That was the explanation. It wasn't that he wanted the child, and it wasn't because of it was in any interest of the child at all.
The ownership.
Saving face, ego.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
That's that saving face stuff. It's just that, my how they say, my seed, that's mine. That's my thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I was asking if
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, forgive me, Julie. Go ahead.
In those cases, how often they go back? Like, is it standard that might go back to court for the court to decide, or is it just?
It goes to court, and it was a contested adoption, so it did go to court. And during that court process is when he backed off. Okay. He actually followed up with us, and sort of tried to rub it in the wound, saying, you failed, I got the child, etc. But the case went on, and eventually he backed off and he gave up the child.
Such a prize. He's real prize. Yes. I just want to say that's why I asked about the grandparents, because I've seen this case before where the actual parent doesn't have an interest in being a parent, but the greater family, for religious or ethical or moral reasons, doesn't want to give up the connection to the child. And they may or may not have been involved with the child at all, but it becomes more of a familial tradition issue than an actual responsibility of parenting or desire to have a relationship with the child issue. Thank you for explaining that. It was really a good thing to explore.
Yeah. And as it turns out, the grandparents didn't want the child either. So
do you agree that takes time? Yes. That kind of, because I'm thinking of that scenario resolved sooner without the time that it took for everybody to kind of settle down and say, I don't really want to be a parent.
No, it wasn't.
And not making certain assumptions and thinking you come to a reasonable resolution, and then months later it doesn't work out that way. But in your case, it took months to figure out what you just said, I'm assuming.
It didn't take months to figure it out. He knew in the moment that he didn't want the child. That wasn't the issue. It was his family's influence, his father behind him saying, you can't give up your blood. Although he didn't want the child either.
So, quick question. Professor Valerie talks to us about accepting different cultural values and different cultural, let's just say, instead of him not wanting the child, let's just say it was a cultural thing where he religiously couldn't give up the child. How do you navigate those? I mean, none of us is versed in all the different cultures. And I'm sure, especially in Southern California, there's so much more that you have to deal with. But how do you navigate cultures, because you think the best interest of the child is to go to an adoptive parent, but maybe the cultural is we can't?
If it was truly a cultural issue, then that would have been raised, and it would not have been an issue. It wouldn't have been a mediation at all.
That makes sense.
It was a family culture that he did not want to give up the child. It wasn't a larger cultural issue.
And so, Martin, these are just ethical exercises you're giving our brains to see where our brains go and where our biases might be, or what the first assumptions come up for us and how we need to discard them to investigate further.
Yes, exactly. And this is the process that you need to go through as a mediator throughout the time you're mediating. And you'll be meeting, hopefully you'll be interacting with other mediators as they come upon situations that they find difficult and that you find difficult, and you can discuss them and your opinions might change over time. Sure. But it's important that you have different perspectives so that you can make the right decisions for yourself when you're as a mediator. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Okay, thank you. It's a valuable exercise. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I hate to be, Melissa and I are very inquisitive, but Professor Valerie also says when you're done with the mediation, you need to find a way to decompress. You need to have an outlet to break down. What is who's your support? How do you detox from a mediation? How do you know?
Before I answer that question, I will answer that question. Before I answer that question, I want to give you another short scenario, very short, because someone raised the question a little earlier about what do you do with your personal biases. And this was another case in dependency court. I walk into the office, and I don't recall what was going on with me, whether I didn't sleep well or what it was, but I walk in, and when we come in, we review the cases. So I walk in and I pull open this case and I'm reading it. It's a history of sexual abuse to the children. I refused to mediate. I said, I can't do this. I had done cases like this before, and I did cases like that afterwards. But in that moment, I did not think that I could proceed and not be very biased in my approach to that mediation. So I recused myself. And sometimes I think that's what you have to do for your own well-being as well as the participants.
Agreed.
Now I'll answer your question. I sew. I'm a quilter.
Cool.
So I do that as a way to get my mind off of things, heavier things. I watch violent movies.
I love that. I just can't picture that, Marvin. It's like...
My question
right
is,
there, huh?
do you watch them twice to see if they have a different ending?
Yes.
So funny.
So I'm a repeat viewer of the Die Hard series.
Okay.
What a great answer.
So is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Yes, definitely.
Die Hard is
Christmas.
a Christmas movie. Definitely a Christmas movie.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And the other movies that I watch are comedies. If I can find a good comedy, something that'll make me laugh, I do that. I don't have a particular person that I go to discuss hard issues, but some mediators I do have a close connection with, and we can discuss cases. And when I was mediating in dependency court, sometimes right after the mediation, we would actually debrief and be able to work through things and kind of disconnect ourselves from the situation. But that is important, that you find a way to to calm yourself down.
Mhm.
Get in a good place for yourself. Self-care is very important. Otherwise, you can't do it very long.
Right.
I just have a picture in my head now of you quilting and watching violent movies. Like,
So awesome. Marvin, will you be my friend now? I like all of that.
I just see him watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I can match that stitch. I can do that stitch.
Right,
funny. At our house,
Oh my
it's
God.
knitting and war movies. I'm married to the son of a naval judge,
Oh, wow.
Oh,
and he
geez.
grew up all traveling all over,
Oh
to
my
the,
God.
and so
That
yeah.
explains an awful lot, you know.
Doesn't it? Just so y'all know us, people crack up because like when we have an issue, we'll like send each other an email. I just want you to know this is going like we totally like we met through business, so people crack up because we like argue like attorneys. And then it's like, we argue, we make our case, and then and so we've been moving for the last probably 10 years, we've been moving to interest-based arguing. And so and so I'm like,
Wow.
yeah, this is really interesting. I think I'm having an influence in my home because
Wow.
of this. So at any rate, it's so important to debrief, and it doesn't really matter what you do to debrief. Everyone has their own little thing, but I have a rowing machine and I knit. And I hike and I sail when things are really bad and I'm working against the bone. I go sailing like I'm going to do on Sunday. So
that's great.
What do you do, Peter, to debrief after you have a big real estate negotiation?
I call your husband. It's interesting. I've been in real estate a really long time, and so negotiation is part of my everyday life. I've been able to separate myself from it fairly quickly. I've had a lot of situations. I've learned how to handle them better, and not to go to extremes. It doesn't mean I don't have moments, but they don't last. And so that's been just something that I've sort of gleaned along the way, is that, just like you can't hold on to positions, you really shouldn't hold on to things that are thought to be about you or some thing that you think you have to overcome. That's going to happen with growth. It's just not going to happen in a minute. And so, yeah, I'm chill in that area.
I can so relate to that, Peter. My background was in real estate too, and it's like it's similar work. Now that you're saying that,
Mm-hmm.
that I can recognize that you can put so much work into a deal that until it's signed off on and
Mm-hmm.
the money's dispersed and everything, anything can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of learn to not put all of you into each thing, because it doesn't always work out the way you plan. And you also have to like recognize everybody's interest, because sometimes that little thing, like what day they want to settle, is all the difference in the world to someone, where you're hung up on the money thinking so you have to kind of learn that balancing too.
Well, and what I said earlier that I was asking Marvin about, this thing of making decisions for people is a tricky business.
Mhm.
You stay at something a really long time, you can almost see something the way it's going to play out.
Yeah.
But you don't know what you don't know. And I have made a couple of decisions for people when they've asked me to, and they haven't always turned out so well, because there were things that just you couldn't see.
Mhm.
And so it's better for them to have what you know and make their own decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is why I don't try to decide for people, because
Sure of it.
No, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
I've been in doing a mediation, and think, oh wow, I don't know what's taking them so long. It's obvious what they should be doing. And then they come up with something that is totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
That's real estate too, right, Peter? That happens plenty of times.
Yeah, so that's why I'm facilitative rather than evaluative or anything else. I'm also an arbitrator, so I can do that and make decisions, but in a mediation, I don't want to go there.
Yeah, makes sense. You
Well, I
have to
think
go
what's
where you're
helpful, go ahead,
comfortable.
Julie, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay.
I think what's helpful for me is I also do conflict coaching. I do coaching. So in coaching, you have to sit back and allow them to get to their own space. Now, sometimes it's kind of hard because you're sitting there like, oh, I just really want you to understand this. And it's like, oh, can you please say it just because it's going to come out your mouth. And then all of a sudden they do, and they go, yes, I've actually in coaching said, yes, I have. I've done it. And she'll look, they'll look at me and I was like, I've been waiting for you to get there, I've been waiting for you to land the plane, I've done that. And you can tell by my personality, I probably would have done that. But so coaching has helped because you just part of coaching. You just don't give them that information. You don't do that. So when you come to the table, then you sit back and like, okay, here we go. Now let's see who's going to get here first and what's going to happen. So you can kind of be more of an observer as you watch it play out. I've really gotten, I've gotten to the point of enjoying watching the process as an observer, allowing it to unfold. Because it's like, okay, you start off in a situation sometimes where you don't think it's going to happen and you don't know where you're going to go. And then all of a sudden things just start to turn and they start to kind of get there on their own. And when they get there on their own, it's just like, it's just so cool to watch, So yeah, I think that's helped me a lot. I've done the conflict coaching and and I do forgiveness coaching too. So that's a whole different genre, so the coaching helps that balance out.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, getting to that point and watching that happen is the reward of mediation. So
Yes.
I love it.
Martin, what do you see on the horizon for the next, say, 3 to 5 years in our work in terms of ethics? What do you think are going to be things that we should have on our radar as the world gets a little more complicated?
An interesting question. No, don't know that I've thought about that. I don't know that substantively it's going to change. I think I've become more aware of things, not that things have changed since I've become a mediator. I think I've become more aware of different approaches to mediation and ethics. I don't think they're going to change that much over the next several years. I think what's in place will probably be what's in place then. Perhaps more emphasis be placed on certain areas of mediation, types of mediation, and how they're handled ethically. I don't know. That's just my thought off the top of my head.
What do you see for MC3? Do you see that really exponentially growing?
I see two futures for MC3. One is that no, it doesn't grow exponentially and just kind of goes along as it is now. But the other is that younger people actually start to see the value of certification, and the fact that MC3 is the only organization that I know of that actually offers a process for a complaint process, so that people can actually have their issues addressed formally, and that actually is based on training that the organization itself is not providing. So MC3 doesn't provide any training or anything like that, like other organizations. For instance, I was a certified financial planner, and I think that's a wonderful organization for financial planners. But that company does provide education for certified financial planners, so there is a conflict of interest there. I think they handle it well, but there is a conflict of interest, so to speak. But they also certify others who take their education from other sources, which I think is the saving grace for them. The test is very difficult, so anybody who passes it, I don't care if they're educated by that organization or another, I think deserves to have the certification. So I think that makes MC3 stand out. It will be up to mediators whether or not they see value in it, whether or not it moves forward, and that future would be where that it does, as you suggested, grow exponentially, and there will be more and more certified mediators following that path. But who knows? There are many organizations who provide other types of certification. So I don't know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Marvin.
Yes, so Julie is saying, yes, you've kept
I know we kept you over. I was just going to say.
Are there any other questions that you have that you'd like to ask?
I just wanted to say thank you, Marvin. I appreciate the information that you've given us this evening.
You're quite welcome. Quite welcome.
And your candor.
And what?
Right?
And your candor.
Oh, yes.
Definitely.
It's very helpful.
And I think the adoption piece is something at least I had never talked much about. That was interesting. I think another type of scenario that we haven't seen a lot of or heard a lot of. So
yeah, it's very specific and it's very difficult to do.
I would imagine it is. I can't think of anything much more difficult than that.
Yeah,
I can't off
agree.
the top of my head. I can't either.
Yeah, I really can't. I mean, complicated.
It's complicated. There's an attorney for the parent. There's an attorney for the child or the children. There's an attorney for the adoptive parents. And then there's, I think that's all. So there are 3 attorneys involved. There's at least 1 mediator involved. And then the participants, which it could be from 2 to 4, because it could be 1 adoptive parent or 2. It could be 1 or 2 parents, natural parents. So it can be quite complicated.
Did you say that the mother was not part of this mediation?
She was not, because she had given up her parental rights already.
Because that would make it a little easier if it not to include them if they've already made their decision.
Yeah, right. In some cases they haven't, and then you have 2 parents to deal with.
Gosh.
At what point do the children, what age are children allowed to have an input? I can't remember in California. What's the?
I believe it's
12 or 14?
12 or 13.
Is it the same for mediation as it is in the court, or is there some grace or like a little bit more they allow in mediation?
There's no rule for mediation. It's up to the mediator, when it gets input, and the mediator's comfort with dealing with the child.
Another complication.
It's another complication, and you really should be prepared for it. It's not something to take lightly.
Wow.
Yeah.
This has been great, Marvin. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yes, definitely.
Really great insights.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Julie, thanks for putting this together. And
sure, I'm sorry that we're having so much trouble with the link. Renee and I are going to get together and call IT and find out. I don't know if it's because we're sharing the access to one of the things or what, but it's causing issues. So.
Right. Well,
Martin, I hope you'll come back and see us again in 6 months or so. We'd love to hear from you again.
All right, thank you. Just invite me back.
We will for sure. And Martin, I'm going to send you a divorce family mediation referral if that's something you handle. I have a client that I need to refer.
Yes.
So look in your inbox for that. I'll email you her.
I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
That's great.
Seeing you guys.